Hey, Campfire crew, let's get it on.
College Secret Society by Electronic Low. At my university, there's a castle just off campus that is home to a secret society. It goes back to the 1800s, and obviously everything they do is kept under serious wraps. On Halloween a couple of years ago, some friends and I went to this castle because we thought it would be fun to go by the creepy castle on Halloween. I had done some research beforehand on this secret society, and there were many articles tying them to demonic and weird stuff, so I thought it would be perfect for Halloween. Anyway, the road to the castle is at the end of a residential street, and you have to walk on a gravel path into the woods to get to it. As we were walking up to the castle, we heard a woman let out the most blood-curdling scream I've ever heard. At that moment, we all ran back to the residential road. Most of the people we were with decided to head back to campus because they were seriously freaked out, but a few of us stayed. We walked back over to the castle, and this time we noticed people standing on top of the castle, wearing black hooded robes. Once we noticed them, they immediately started throwing rocks at us. At that point, we decided to leave. But as we made our way down the path, we heard what sounded like Latin chanting coming from the castle. When we made it back to the actual road, we saw some other students who had come from the woods behind the castle. They mentioned that they had also heard a woman scream, and that they were also just as freaked out as us. As we were talking, we heard the sound of a little boy yelling, "Help!" and then again, "Someone, please help!" It was coming from the direction of the castle, so we decided to go back because obviously some kid needed help. When we got there, we noticed that the amount of hooded figures had doubled, and they were all looking at us from the roof of the castle. We stood there for a few minutes just staring at them, but we decided it was best to leave because they had already shown hostility. This experience honestly shook me, but I thought maybe it was just a Halloween prank. But the more I thought about it, I realized I wasn't so sure. We were out there for about 2 hours, and our group and the other group of students were the only ones out there that whole time. Why would they come up with some elaborate scheme for only 10 people? And how could I explain the screaming woman and kid if it was just a prank? I know this sounds far-fetched, but I think something really happened that night. I'm curious if you guys think I'm crazy for believing that it could have been something more than just a Halloween prank. Could this have been some kind of sacrifice or demonic ritual? Nearly Kidnapped While Walking My Dog by Miley Hudson. I'm a 14-year-old female, and I was walking my dog Stella around my neighborhood. I'd been at a craft fair all day and was super tired because it had been raining and I hadn't made much money. I was asked to walk Stella just after I'd gotten back with my mom, so I said yes. We headed out and I was strolling along watching the sky because it was looking like it was going to pour and I didn't have a raincoat on, just an oversized hoodie. I heard a car turn down the street I was walking on with Stella. I didn't think much of it. But it got closer to me, and I heard it slow down. I assumed it was going to turn into a driveway, and I looked back just to be cautious. The car, I believe it was a Chevy, but I'm not sure. It was one of those car brands with the name of it spelled out on the front. I just don't remember the name of the brand. But I noticed it did not have a front license plate. This is illegal in Canada. In Canada, you must have both front and back license plates. Though if your car is from the U.S., or you now live in or just in Canada, you're all good. The car didn't turn into a driveway, and I was a little more unsettled now. I heard it slowly getting closer and closer to me, so I put Stella to the other side of me off the road. I was even more frightened when I heard one of the doors of the car open as the car continued driving. I muttered to myself, "Oh fuck, here we go. I'd better be able to scream well." A hand then grabbed my wrist and jerked me towards the car. I wrestled with the guy for a couple of seconds, and then I screamed. I haven't screamed in quite a while. I'm quite a quiet teen, unless I'm with my friends. This dude jerked his arm again, and Stella, being the silly goof she is, finally clued in that I was in danger. She pounced at the guy, grabbing onto his leg with her jaws and making him scream like a girl. One thing to note is that Stella is part terrier. Terriers are rat killers, so when they grab onto something, they ain't letting go. The guy loosened his grip on me by now, and I seized the opportunity and kicked him hard enough to make him drop if he'd been standing. He shrieked and let go of me, which made Stella let go of his leg. I grabbed her and sprinted back to my house. I caught the license plate. I don't remember it now, but I do know it was from New Brunswick, and I'm in British Columbia. I'm scared to think how far the two men would have gotten with me if Stella hadn't been with me. Escaped a possible subway shooting by Fucklin Clone. So I just got back from a trip to New York City. I go there multiple times a year as I have family and a handful of close friends that live there. I've been meaning to share this since it happened a couple of nights ago, but I wanted to make sure I had the time to sit down and regather all the details correctly. I know we've all heard crazy subway stories at one point or another, but I never thought I would end up in one this terrifying. I was headed back to my hotel from a friend's house at around 3 a.m. the other night. My friend lives deep in Brooklyn, and my hotel was in Manhattan, so if you know the city, you know that's about a 30 or 45-minute long train ride, give or take. My train finally arrived, and I was happy to be headed home. I was exhausted, and it was late. My trip had gone unexpectedly well up until that point, so I had faith I'd be able to get home with no worries, especially since the trains and streets were basically empty at that hour. The train was brand new and had just been cleaned, something I'd never seen before. I mean, hell, it even smelled like a new car and still had fresh mop water on the floor. There were only about 3 other people on the train, all minding their own business. So far, so good. About 2 stops into the train ride, a black dude that looked like he was in his late 20s stumbled into our train car mid-ride through the connecting doors of the cars. He was wearing a Nike ski mask, a shiesty mask if you know you know, which usually wasn't a good sign on a nice 70-degree night in general context. But, at the same time, I'm not one to judge by appearance. Plus, I know the shiesty mask is sort of a trend nowadays, so I didn't think too much of it at first. He sort of hobbled in and he was clutching his stomach, almost as if he was concealing something or hiding a wound. His eyes were bloodshot red, and at first I thought it was because he was high or something. He immediately hobbled into the nearest corner and sort of sulked into the corner, facing it, until the next stop. He then ran out the closest door and erupted into the most painful crying I've ever heard. He was just screaming and moaning and crying, all while stumble running alongside the stopped train on the platform, still clutching his stomach, screaming things like, "Why?" and gasping through his tears. Now, keep in mind, I was sitting in the middle of the train facing away from the side he had got off on, so I was kind of breaking my neck behind me as he was running behind me. I was just trying to watch what was going on. He then ran back inside the same car, through the door on the opposite side of the car now. He was on my right before, but now he was on my left. There was no one in between me and him, since everyone else was closer to the right side. He was still skulking while facing the corner on the other side of the car now, but this time he kept screaming and crying and yelling out, "Why?" again. But he was crying so hysterically that it was hard to make out a lot of what he was saying. From some of the words I gathered, though, I'm almost positive that a very close friend of his had just gotten killed or something. It's the only thing that would explain the way he was acting and the things he was saying. Plus, he was suited up like he had just come back from a street mission gone bad or something. At that point, everyone on the train was frantically flicking their eyes over to him every few seconds. You could tell they were panicked, but not trying to cause a scene about it or rile him up even more. I was getting a little sussed out myself, but I had seen or heard about worse on the subways, and if someone he had really known just died, then I honestly felt horrible for the guy before anything else. But then the entire situation escalated to a point that I had only seen in movies or crime shows. The guy stayed in the corner, crying, screaming, and muttering things to himself for another 3 minutes or so, all while still clutching his stomach as if he was concealing something. I had definitely seen a black object in his hands at that point, but I couldn't tell if it was big enough to be a gun or not. After I saw it, I tried not to take my eyes off of him for too long at a time, since I was the closest person to him, but I also didn't want to stare at him. At that point, he was starting to say things like, "Someone's got to pay for this," and then he would just repeat it louder and louder. And then he burst into a dialogue that made my heart fucking drop. Keep in mind, he was still facing the corner, hunched over, clutching his item. "All you motherfuckers sitting on this train right now, you're all gonna feel me tonight, you hear me? You're all gonna feel me tonight, and you're all gonna fucking hate it too. Oh my God, you're all gonna fucking hate this. You're all gonna hate me." He kept getting louder and louder as he was saying this, to the point where he was basically screaming by the last part. I don't know what he said after that, because as soon as that train stopped next, I fucking bolted. He wasn't screaming shit at me as I got off, but I could hear it, and I definitely wasn't going to turn back. I ran back up the nearest street exit, chain-smoked a couple of cigarettes, and waited 20 minutes for the next train to come. I've seen enough in my life to know that that wasn't a situation I was willing to gamble with at all, and I prayed the last 3 people on that train got home safe and nothing happened. I briefly searched Twitter and the news the next day for any possible info I could find, but I didn't see anything. But who even knows what's worth a headline to these people down there anymore? So, to the man in the subway at 3 a.m., I pray you find the solace you need and heal from whatever trauma you're going through. But please, let's not ever meet again. I found a cult in the Yosemite woods by Fishy. Every summer I go camping in Yosemite with my cousins, and every trip we spend a night stargazing. There's a village with markets and restaurants down the road from the campsites, and across the road from the village is a large field of tall grass, with a winding, narrow boardwalk that leads deep into the field. Imagine a boardwalk dock that reaches out into a bay, but instead of open water, it's a field surrounded by towering trees. This is usually where we sat to watch the stars. That night of stargazing was uneventful, as the sky was cloudy, and we weren't able to see the stars at all, so we just sat and smoked for a bit. One of my cousins noticed a light deep within the woods that was still and bright. He pointed it out because he thought it was odd that there was a light in that direction to begin with, as that area of woods has no buildings or campsites, as there shouldn't have been people in that area, as it was very late by that time. We moved closer towards that area of the woods along the boardwalk, and were able to see that the light was twinkling. It looked as though the light came from a flame. It's strict in the rules of any wooded national park that you shouldn't light flames in any area that don't have a designated fire pit. My cousin was certain that where the light was coming from was empty and open woods, and was well out of distance from any campsites, roads, or housing. The flame must have been very deep into the woods, because no matter how close we got along the boardwalk, the light wasn't becoming any more clear to make out. We stopped when we heard a commotion, as though a large group of people were out there. We assumed that there must have been a party going on until we heard chanting. It started as loud party sounds, but slowly turned into synchronized whooping and then howling. Not like a wolf howl, but more like harmonized groans and wailing. The voices became more guttural and projected as almost though the people were making them were in pain or misery. The sounds we heard were no longer ignorable, and it was obvious that something odd was happening back in those woods. Before I knew it, I was the only one closest to the end of the boardwalk when I turned around and saw all of my cousins had stayed back, huddled far behind me, staring with me into the trees. My heart was racing, and all there was to see was that light twinkling deep in the dark. The faint sounds of wailing were enough to know that whatever was going on around that light was not a party. The next morning my cousins and I ventured into the woods in the general direction of where we saw the light, and sure enough, it was empty woods in every direction for an acre or two. No sign of a camp or cabins. The only evidence of people being there was a large patch of dirt and pine needles where we found masses of bare footprints left in the mud and soil. Summing up this whole experience, we saw a flame deep in the forest where no people should be that late at night, when there were no buildings or campsites out there. I mean, mind you, there's bears in those woods, and you could get kicked out of the park for endangering and pestering the wildlife. 2, we had heard loud, harmonized wailing and chanting coming from the direction of that light. And 3, the next morning, we saw a large mass of bare footprints in the soil, where we could see the boardwalk we were standing on far past the trees, behind the woods. New roommate turned out to be a stalker by Strange Expression. The last 48 hours of my life have been nuts. I'm a 25-year-old non-binary person renting a 4-bedroom house. One of my roommates is my boyfriend, and the other is my best friend of 10 years. I'll call her Tracy. We'd been looking around for a new roommate, and because of the way this situation turned out, we determined that I was no longer able to be in charge of looking for roommates because I am not judgmental enough, and I have been known to ignore red flags. So I'll start from the beginning, which is the house showing. Our new prospective roommate showed up for the house showing and introduced himself. He definitely seemed strange at first, but I wrote it off as him just being eccentric. The main red flag was that at some point, he randomly said something to the effect of, "And I will not bring meth into your house because I am not on meth. I hate drugs, and I see them as a scourge on this entire country." I didn't ask, so I was immediately weirded out. But my boyfriend and the roommate who was moving out also met the guy, and they both thought that apart from that, he seemed normal. He didn't seem like a stereotypical meth head. His skin was clear, and he was kind of chubby. We thought that maybe he thought I was a meth head, because I do look a bit scary. I have green hair, a 1G septum, and 6 facial piercings. In addition, my roommate who was moving out turned out to be hiding a cat, which made the house stink like cat piss, which I have been told is what meth smells like. Also, the town this guy was coming from is known for meth and crack, and he seemed to be explicitly trying to get away from that town. So I thought that maybe he was afraid of ending up in a situation where he was living with drug addicts, and was trying to suss us out that way. Giving him the benefit of the doubt was my first mistake. Tracy and I both wigged out about the entire thing, but we were kind of desperate for a roommate, and all the other people responding to my listing either were not great fits, or were even sketchier than this guy. So, we let him move in. I'll skip to the move-in date. He brought an old man to help him move his stuff, and then he proceeded to make the old man move all of the things by himself up the stairs while he just sat there. That included a refrigerator. The new guy signed the lease, and immediately after signing the lease, he informed us that he did not introduce himself using his real name, and proceeded to tell us his real name. He was not transgender, so the only reason I can think of as for why he initially gave us a fake name is probably so he could avoid having us run a background check. After that, I had to go to work. Throughout my shift, Tracy sent me a message that the guy is weird, but her responses were vague, and I didn't find out what happened until I got home. This is what she told me. The new guy went out to the bar after signing the lease and came back after being kicked out before 9 p.m. The bar he went to is a biker bar that is notorious for being rowdy. I mean, it's hard to get kicked out of there. You pretty much have to do something heinous, or you have to have been creeping on the women there in order to get kicked out. But when he came back, he was drunk off his ass and said, "The men there must have been intimidated by me." It sounded to me like he was creeping on women then. Before that, I had told the new guy that our landlord was coming up the next day to fix some things in the house. When the new guy came home, Tracy reminded him that our landlord was coming the next day. He became extremely angry to the point that he was flailing his arms and she thought he was going to start breaking things. Tracy was so uncomfortable that she almost went to wake up my boyfriend in the other room. Eventually, the new guy did calm down, however. There is a beanbag next to my couch, and Tracy was sitting on the beanbag with her legs slung over the armrest of the couch. At first, the new guy sat on the couch. Then he began to read off poetry that he had wrote to her for an entire hour and a half, all of which was just literally streams of consciousness about how he wants all junkies to die. Afterward, he started telling her how beautiful she was over and over, and literally laid his head down between her legs. She was trying to ignore him, and he wouldn't stop asking her if she fell asleep. Every time she moved away, he got closer. Then he started inviting her to his room for some beer. Eventually, she just got up and went to her room at 11 p.m. So this guy had been harassing her for 2 entire hours. I thought that was everything, but then she told me that she sent the guy's picture to her mom, who then sent his picture to everyone she knew because she's from the town he was previously living in. It turned out that he had been stalking Tracy's aunt for an entire year, and that he was banned from the bar that she worked at because he would go there and threaten to kidnap her. Whenever she works, she literally has to be escorted out, not only by workers, but the customers also escort her to her car sometimes. So we told our landlord, and luckily our lease hadn't been finalized yet, so he agreed to kick him out. I called my mom to come over, and Tracy called her brother for backup, just in case things went south. Our landlord showed up and essentially told him that he needed to leave, and he didn't let the new guy get a word in. The new guy started getting agitated and aggressive, so we called the cops and several officers showed up, told the guy that he had no legal standing as there was no lease. He introduced himself to us with a fake name, after all, and he hadn't even been there for a full 24 hours. He had to go. The guy had to beg his sister to pick him up, and she was so unwilling to do it that she didn't agree with him until he offered to pay her $200. It was only a 20-minute ride to where he was going. He left most of his stuff on our porch. And then we went into his room, and it smelled like cigarette smoke, and there was an empty pack on the floor, including not 1 or 2, but 7 empty Dr. Pepper cans and garbage and crusty socks everywhere. The entire situation had me so stressed out that I didn't even notice that he had also left a pair of pissy shorts in the middle of the house's main hallway, and that was also the first thing you saw when you walked into the house. They were there for the entire day when he knew the landlord was coming. They were still sitting there when he left. I picked them up with a pair of gloves and put them on the porch for him to retrieve. But who knew if he was going to retrieve his things because he came back earlier, touched his things like he was going to take them, and then just immediately left. All I have to say is that I'm so relieved that we caught this before the lease was finalized, because this easily could have turned into a situation where Tracy and I were being sexually assaulted, or worse. My post on Let's Not Meet, Put My Stalker in Jail, by Anonymous. This time last year, my roommate and I started to do a daily outfit check on our Ring doorbell. For context, our apartment was one of 4 in a split-level house located in the city. We were the only apartment situated on the first floor. The front door of the house is unlocked, and there is no key. It opens to a staircase that leads up, and a spiral staircase that goes downstairs. I would press the doorbell that's outside my personal door, introduce what I was wearing, and my roommate would do the same. We did that until about December. December rolled around, and I'd accumulated enough clips to make a TikTok. And as we were flipping through our daily fits, there were rings from a man I didn't recognize. I was shocked. The clips were all scary as fuck. When we looked back through the recorded history to see what came before this guy had just come into my house, it was me. This guy would come inside a minute after me, idle at my door and pretend to cry, hide his face and become visibly frustrated, and then he'd leave. I was scared as fuck. I had never been scared before in my life, and that fear was palpable. I stopped walking alone altogether. I stopped leaving my house. I thought I was paranoid because I live in the city, so of course he could have just been some younger, mentally ill homeless person. Or maybe he had found something of mine. Or, like my dogs, and had a question about them. I mean, whatever. I posted to Reddit to get some insight, and that post changed my life. I was made aware that I was being naive about the whole situation, that I was literally being stalked, that this wasn't funny, that this was dangerous, and lastly, that the man stalking me was naked from the waist down in 2 of the 3 videos I had posted. He was naked. I couldn't handle how embarrassing this situation was, and I stopped bringing people over to my house. I didn't think the post I made would have gotten as much attention as it did. My friends had read my post before, and I'd even told them what was going on, and I received tons of messages about whether or not I was safe, about the videos that I had posted, and whether or not people could do story times about what happened to me. If I had finally gone to the police or whatever, they were all positive messages. Except one. I got a message from an account that said, "Please delete your post. I am not a stalker." Huh? Like, what the fuck? Was he hoping this would provide me some sort of relief? Expecting me to see that and think, "Oh, whew, glad that's cleared up." No, I posted to Let's Not Meet. I ended it with exactly that. Why would anyone send a message like that if they were the person that the post was about? Crazy as fuck. When I went to look at the profile in question, there was that man's punk-ass face. The same face from my Ring videos. I was mortified. He had recorded a video of himself speaking at one point and posted it to a Reddit community about soccer or something. And my heart just fucking sank hearing him talk. I blocked the account after screenshotting everything, and I sent it to my school's police. They followed up with me, but because he was a stranger, there wasn't anything anyone could do about it, besides wait for it to happen again. It didn't. I stopped seeing him, and fast forward to July, I moved into my new house. I am fucking elated to be alive. It's July 1st and I feel free. I'm moving in with my mom. I'm skipping and bopping around. Everything was great. July 2nd, and I was walking my dogs, and we ran around the back of my house. As we were rounding a corner to make it back there was a person on the opposite side of the sidewalk. Something about him pinged in my brain, and as we walked past one another, just several feet away from me, he looked at me in the eye and smiled. I looked at my friend and stopped in my tracks. It was broad daylight, and I'd never been so angry. I looked at her and I said loud enough for anyone to hear, "That's the guy that was naked at my door." He didn't react and kept walking. "That's the guy that found my Reddit post." Nothing. I faced him, and his back was to me, and I screamed, "If I ever see you here again, I will beat the fuck out of you." In hindsight, that was the worst thing I could have said, but I was mortified. I took a picture of him and called the police, and they couldn't find him. July 5th, He was sitting across the street from my house waiting for me and my roommates to see him and take a photo. The police found him and told him to stay away, but he didn't and was right back at my damn house. They issued me an emergency PPO and issued a warrant for stalking. He was arrested and bonded himself out. I feel kind of redundant saying this, but he showed back up the same day he bonded out. I called the police, and he had to see the magistrate again, and they issued another warrant for felony stalking and violating a PPO. He showed up every single day, even after being arrested and being out on bond. He didn't show up to the hearing for the PPO and stalking charges, which placed him in contempt of court. And then a fucking bounty hunter had to find him, and he's sitting in jail right now. Our court date is next week, and I just can't fucking believe this all happened. It's so crazy to feel safe enough to discuss this finally. Uncle Josh note. Links to the Ring camera footage described in this video is in the description below if you're interested. The Black Figure by Scarlet Veils. A few months ago, I moved to a small town for a fresh start. Everything seemed perfect until the stalking began. It started subtly, but quickly escalated into a nightmare that still haunts me. One evening, as I walked home from my job at the local coffee shop, I noticed someone standing under a streetlight a block away. It was late, and the streets were deserted. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching. I brushed it off as someone waiting for a friend and quickened my pace. When I glanced back, the figure was gone. The next morning, I found a note under my door, and it read, "I see you." I tried to convince myself it was a prank, but over the next few days, the notes kept coming, each one more unsettling than the last. "You look lovely today. I know where you work. You can't hide from me." The handwriting was always the same, neat, precise, and frankly chilling. I reported it to the police, but without a suspect, they couldn't do much. One night, I came home to find my front door slightly ajar. My heart pounded as I stepped inside, every sense on high alert. I checked every room, and nothing seemed out of place, but the air felt thick with a sinister presence. I installed a security system with cameras, hoping that would bring me some peace of mind. For a while, things were quiet. Then, one morning, I checked the footage. Around 3 a.m., a hooded figure appeared at my door. It stood there for hours, just staring at the camera. I couldn't see a face, but the stillness that they had was unnerving. I showed the footage to the police, but without a clear identification, they couldn't help. A week later, I was in bed trying to sleep when I heard a soft tapping on my window. I lived on the second floor, so it couldn't have been an animal. I froze, and the tapping continued, rhythmic and deliberate. Summoning all of my courage, I crept to the window and peeked out through the blinds. On the fire escape was the hooded figure, his face hidden in shadows, but his eyes, cold and unblinking, locked onto mine. I screamed and they fled, but the encounter left me terrified. I couldn't stay there any longer. I moved out the next day, leaving everything behind. I still don't know who that was or what he wanted. Sometimes, even now, I feel those eyes watching me from the shadows. Stay safe, everyone. You never know who might be watching you right now. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like to hear narrated on my channel or podcast, email it to unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. If you're in the States, I hope you're enjoying your Memorial Day weekend, and I would remind you, please take a moment to remember all of those who have fallen fighting for our country. I know this world's a fucked up place, but these are people that gave everything that they had, and they didn't come back. If you haven't already, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Leave a comment down below. I'd love to hear what you think of the stories, and I'll get back to you as quickly as I can. Follow me on social media. There's links to that in the description. And of course, if you'd like to take your support of my page even further, find me on Patreon. A link to that is in the description, as well as one to my TeePublic storefront. Get yourself some Campfire Crew and Uncle Josh merchandise. Everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.